For 77 years, Cain Idris tracked the meteor across star systems, driven by obsession no one understood. When it finally landed, he discovered not just a celestial object but a perfect black sphere, and the woman inside who knew his name before he spoke it. Her first words were a warning. They found us. And when the coalition troops descended, she offered a hand that would pull him out of time itself. Cain stood alone in the desert sand, his body still while his eyes tracked invisible paths across the evening sky. The air carried the scent of dry earth and cooling stone, but his attention remained fixed on the empty expanse above. A gaze that saw what instruments confirmed but human eyes could not. For 77 years, this same ritual had repeated itself across dozens of star systems, each observation logged, each fragment of data catalogued with methodical precision. His colleagues at the Institute had called it madness long before they stopped returning his messages. Funding proposals were returned unread, superiors citing more practical applications for limited resources. Friends who once shared meals with him gradually stopped inviting him, their conversations shifting from personal warmth to awkward silences. The meteor became his sole companion, an unchanging constant in a life that shed every other attachment. He'd sacrificed partnerships, professional respect, even the possibility of family. Normal comforts meant nothing compared to the pull of that singular object hurtling through the void. Where others saw scientific curiosity, Cain felt something deeper, a sense of purpose that bordered on destiny. Every adjustment to his scanning array, every recalibration of the spectral analyzers, felt less like research and more like preparation. He knew the meteor's nickel-iron composition down to the percentage points, its trajectory through 7 decades of travel, the faint energy signature that distinguished it from every other celestial body. These weren't facts he recalled, they were rhythms he felt, patterns etched into his consciousness like a second heartbeat. This was no academic pursuit. It was compulsion, an all-consuming drive that left no room for anything else. What pushed a man to dedicate his entire adult life to tracking a single object across the galaxy? The answer lay buried in childhood, a trauma half-remembered, a night of fire and loss that haunted his dreams. His father's laboratory, the smell of ozone, the sharp tang of fear. Official reports called it an accident. Cain knew better. The meteor's path matched calculations from his father's private notes, equations too advanced for their time, hinting at truths beyond conventional science. That connection, faint as a star in daylight, had guided him ever since. The meteor tore through the atmosphere with a sound that wasn't natural, a metallic shriek layered over the roar of superheated air. Cain watched through darkened lenses as it carved a burning scar across the evening sky, its trajectory precisely matching the calculations he'd maintained for decades. He didn't flinch as the heat washed over him, his focus absolute, his breathing measured. The ground trembled faintly under his boots, but his eyes never left the descending object. Instead of the expected impact crater and scattered debris, the object settled onto the desert floor with unsettling grace. It barely disturbed the fine red sand, coming to rest as gently as a feather. No explosion, no shockwave, no fragmentation. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise that preceded it. Cain lowered his protective lenses, his instruments already humming with fresh data, their screens flickering with readings that made no sense. The object before him was a perfect sphere, completely intact despite its violent entry. Its surface absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating a void of absolute blackness against the pale desert landscape. There were no scorch marks, no abrasions from atmospheric friction, no signs of the tremendous forces it had just endured. It simply existed, a geometric anomaly where there should have been cosmic rubble. Cain approached slowly, his portable scanner emitting a series of erratic beeps. The readings fluctuated wildly, energy signatures that spiked and vanished, material compositions that shifted between known elements, and something entirely unidentifiable. The device had never failed him before, but now it seemed confused, its algorithm struggling to categorize what stood before them. He reached out a gloved hand, his fingers hovering inches from the surface. The sphere's perfection was unnerving, no seams, no imperfections, no indicators of its origin. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the magnitude of the moment. 77 years of pursuit had led to this object that defied every law of astrophysics he'd dedicated his life to understanding. As his fingertips made contact, The surface felt neither hot nor cold, but something else entirely. A sensation like static without electricity, presence without substance. This was no random space rock caught in gravity's pull. The geometric precision, the controlled descent, the anomalous readings, everything pointed to intelligent design. Someone had built this, someone had sent it, and after nearly 8 decades of travel across star systems, it had reached its destination with purpose. At the moment Kane's gloved hand made contact, the surface of the sphere emitted a sharp, crystalline crack. Not the sound of breaking material, but something closer to frozen water fracturing under pressure. The perfect black surface didn't shatter. Instead, it began to reconfigure itself. Intricate geometric patterns surfacing like living circuitry awakening from a long sleep. Lines of faint blue light traced across the darkness, intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow, resembling constellations mapping themselves onto a void. Instead of an opening hatch or a mechanical division, sections of the sphere began dissolving at precise, predetermined points. The material didn't break apart or melt. It simply ceased to be where it had existed moments before, vanishing without residue or heat. Where solid matter had been, a translucent chamber gradually revealed itself, filled with a thick amber liquid that glowed with its own internal light. The substance moved slowly with the viscosity of honey, yet showed no signs of containment leakage or pressure change. Suspended within the glowing liquid floated a woman, her body held in perfect preservation. Her features appeared human at first glance. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but possessed a symmetry so flawless it felt unsettling. The proportions of her face followed ratios unknown in nature, her limbs arranged in a posture that suggested neither sleep nor death, but rather a state of waiting. Her skin held a faint luminescence, as if capturing and softly radiating the amber light surrounding her. Kane's monitoring equipment registered biological functions at levels that shouldn't be possible. Her heart showed 1 beat every several minutes, her brain activity registering patterns that fluctuated between deep unconsciousness and sudden, intense bursts of neural firing. The readings indicated suspended animation, but of a kind far beyond any human stasis technology. Her cells showed no degradation, no signs of aging or metabolic waste accumulation, despite what must have been decades of travel. This was preservation technology of an order Kane had never encountered, even in theoretical papers. Human cryogenics required massive energy consumption and still resulted in cellular damage. This chamber maintained perfect biological suspension without apparent energy source or life support systems. The fluid itself seemed to function as both nutrient bath and temporal buffer, its chemical composition shifting subtly even as he watched. How could any living being survive such extended isolation intact? The answer lay in biology fundamentally different from human life. Her species clearly possessed cellular mechanisms that could decouple from linear time, entering states where biological processes could be paused without damage, where consciousness could be stored rather than extinguished. They had evolved not just for space travel, but for journeys that spanned generations, their very bodies designed to withstand stretches of time that would destroy human travelers. The amber liquid began to drain from the chamber with a soft, hydraulic sigh, the pressure seals releasing not with a mechanical clank, but with the gentle exhalation of something organic. The substance flowed downward through channels that hadn't been visible moments before, disappearing into the base of the sphere as if being reabsorbed rather than discarded. The woman's form remained suspended for a moment longer, then settled gently onto the floor of the now transparent capsule. Her eyes opened without flutter or hesitation. There was no slow focusing, no disoriented blinking at the sudden change from stasis to wakefulness. Her gaze fixed immediately on Kane, clear and knowing as if she'd been observing him the entire time. Her irises held a subtle shift in color that human eyes couldn't duplicate, patterns within patterns that seemed to capture and reflect the fading desert light. She rose from the chamber in one fluid motion, needing no support from the sides, no gradual adjustment to standing. Her movement possessed a grace that went beyond athleticism. It suggested a different relationship with gravity itself, a coordination that appeared almost rehearsed yet completely natural. The desert wind caught strands of her hair, but she showed no reaction to the sudden change in temperature or atmosphere. Her skin maintained its faint luminescence even outside the glowing liquid, as if containing its own light source. The effect was subtle but unmistakable, a soft radiance that seemed to emanate from beneath the surface rather than reflect from without. In the growing twilight, she stood as a figure both solid and somehow not entirely of the physical world. She looked directly at Kane, her expression holding neither confusion nor wonder, but instead a mix of recognition and pressing urgency. Her features conveyed the certainty of someone encountering not a stranger, but someone whose face they'd known for years. There was no question in her eyes, only confirmation. When she spoke, her voice carried an unusual quality, as if multiple people were speaking the same words in perfect unison. The effect wasn't loud or overwhelming, but rather layered, giving her speech a dimensional quality that normal human voices lacked. The sound seemed to come from slightly different points in space simultaneously, creating a subtle echo that wasn't truly an echo at all. Kane Idris, she said, the name precise and clear despite the vocal complexity. He hadn't spoken, hadn't offered identification, hadn't moved beyond standing frozen in place. She knew him instantly, without introduction or hesitation, as if his identity were written plainly before her. They had never met in this lifetime, never exchanged words or shared space before this moment. Yet her certainty was absolute, her knowledge of him immediate and comprehensive. This recognition went beyond facial familiarity or name recognition. It suggested a connection that transcended their current circumstances, a relationship that existed outside the linear progression of time they currently inhabited. The reason for her immediate knowledge lay in the nature of her people's existence. They experienced reality not as a single timeline, but as multiple possibilities existing simultaneously. Their consciousness could perceive connections across what humans would consider separate realities, seeing patterns of relationship that spanned different versions of existence. Where Kane saw one lifetime, she potentially saw many, and in several of them they had known each other intimately. Their connection wasn't limited to this particular reality, but existed across numerous timelines and probability streams, making their meeting here not a first encounter but a reunion across possibilities. When her fingers met his, the contact triggered a cascade of memory that struck with physical force. Kane's vision blurred as images burst into his consciousness, vivid and unbidden. He saw his father's private laboratory, a place he hadn't visited in years yet remembered with aching clarity. The smell came first, the sharp sting of ozone layered over the scent of heated metal, and something else, something indefinable that always lingered in that space. He could feel the cool concrete floor beneath his younger self's shoes, see the banks of monitors displaying equations that flowed like water. The memory sharpened, focusing on a specific night 7 years earlier. Rain had been falling outside, tapping against the laboratory's reinforced windows. His father's voice carried a tension Kane had never heard before, a mix of excitement and underlying fear. He was speaking about something called temporal research, his hands moving rapidly as he explained concepts that sounded like science fiction. The older man's eyes kept darting toward the door, his sentences becoming more rushed, more urgent. His father warned him about forces that would want this knowledge, organizations that would misuse what he was discovering. He spoke of time not as a linear progression, but as a fabric that could be manipulated, a dimension that could be navigated. The work was too important, too dangerous to share prematurely. Kane remembered the way his father's hands trembled slightly as he secured data drives into a hidden compartment. His movements hurried yet precise. Then came the explosion, a sound that started as a deep rumble and became a deafening roar. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency lighting that cast everything in eerie red. Kane saw himself being pushed toward a reinforced door, his father's hand on his back, shoving him to safety. The last thing he saw was his father turning back toward the main console, determined to erase the research rather than let it fall into the wrong hands. Official reports called it a laboratory accident, a tragic case of equipment failure. The investigation concluded quickly, the findings neatly packaged and filed away. But Kane knew better. The patterns of the explosion, the way certain evidence seemed to vanish, the presence of unidentified observers at the scene, none of it matched the official story. He had kept his doubts to himself, knowing that speaking them aloud would only bring more danger. The Meteor's trajectory matched calculations from his father's private notes exactly. The equations he'd spent years studying, the patterns he'd tracked across star systems, they all originated from that lost research. This woman from the stars knew things about that night that had never been recorded, details that existed only in his memory. She spoke of events and conversations that had happened behind closed doors, moments that should have been known only to him and his father. The traumatic event that connected them was his father's death, but not as a simple accident. His father had been protecting revolutionary knowledge about the nature of time itself, understanding that in the wrong hands, such power could unravel reality. The sacrifice wasn't just about preserving research. It was about preventing catastrophe, about ensuring that understanding of temporal mechanics would be earned through wisdom, rather than seized through force. Dust clouds rose on the horizon, moving against the wind with unnatural speed and direction. These weren't weather formations. They traveled too purposefully, cutting across the desert in straight formations that ignored natural terrain features. The approaching disturbance moved like a coordinated hunt, rather than random atmospheric activity. Its progress marked by the rising plume of reddish sand kicked up by multiple vehicles moving in tight formation. Eris's eyes tracked the approaching threat with immediate recognition, her gaze sharpening as she calculated distances and speeds. Her body tensed almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of the controlled alarm that now gripped her. She didn't startle or panic, but her posture shifted from revelation to readiness, her attention dividing between Kane and the approaching danger. Her expression showed no surprise at their arrival, only the grim acceptance of something long anticipated. "They found us," she said, her voice carrying that layered quality, but now tightened by urgency. The words held no question, only statement of fact. Her fear wasn't the panic of someone caught unprepared, but the focused concern of someone who understood exactly what was coming and how quickly it would arrive. She'd clearly faced this threat before, recognized its patterns and methods. The vehicles emerged from the dust cloud, revealing sleek armored transports bearing military markings from the Earth Coalition. Their design showed advanced engineering, hover capability that left no tracks, weapons mounts that tracked and adjusted independently, armor plating that seemed to absorb light much like the sphere itself. These weren't standard planetary defense vehicles, but something more specialized, equipped with technology beyond usual military issue. Their speed and approach vector showed precise knowledge of the landing site. They didn't sweep the area or search randomly. They came directly toward the sphere's position as if guided by real-time tracking. Their formation suggested they'd been waiting for this moment, positioned to respond the instant the sphere activated or its occupant awakened. Their timing was too perfect, their arrival too immediate to be coincidental. Eris explained quickly, her words measured but urgent. The Coalition had been hunting her people for generations, tracking their movements across star systems. They didn't seek understanding or peaceful contact. They wanted to capture and reverse engineer the temporal technology her species possessed. Their interest wasn't scientific curiosity but military application, the desire to weaponize abilities that could manipulate time itself. Kane's lifetime of meticulous tracking had unwittingly delivered them the ultimate prize. His decades of calculations, his precise predictions of the meteor's path, his unwavering dedication to intercepting its arrival, all had created the perfect circumstances for the Coalition to acquire what they'd been seeking for centuries. His obsession had led them directly to the very thing they wanted most. The urgent danger requiring immediate escape became clear. The Coalition didn't just want the technology. They would eliminate anyone who might understand its workings or pose future opposition. Witnesses represented liabilities, potential rivals who might challenge their monopoly on temporal power. Their arrival moments after awakening confirmed they'd been monitoring for this event, waiting to secure both the technology and silence anyone involved. This organization sought nothing less than complete control over time itself, viewing it as the ultimate strategic resource. With such power, they could rewrite history, eliminate opposition before it formed, and secure absolute dominance across known space. They approached not as explorers or scientists, but as conquerors who recognized that controlling time meant controlling reality, and they would remove anyone standing between them and that goal. Kane hesitated, his eyes sweeping across the scattered equipment that represented his life's work. Data tablets lay where he'd dropped them, their screens still glowing with the final readings from the sphere. His field notes fluttered in the desert wind, pages filled with 77 years of observations and calculations. Every piece of instrumentation, every carefully maintained log, every theory painstakingly developed, all of it lay exposed and vulnerable before the approaching threat. This wasn't just research material. It was the physical manifestation of his entire adult existence, the tangible proof of a pursuit that had cost him everything else. 77 years of dedicated study could potentially answer questions humanity had asked for centuries. The technology within the sphere offered insights into physics that defied current understanding, biological preservation methods that could revolutionize medicine, energy systems that operated on principles unknown to human science. The data could unlock interstellar travel, extend human lifespan, potentially solve countless problems that plagued civilization. The knowledge represented by that perfect black sphere and its occupant was nothing less than a key to humanity's next evolutionary step, but handing this knowledge to the Coalition would mean unleashing power beyond any weapon system ever conceived. They wouldn't use temporal understanding to heal or explore. They would weaponize it, turning the fabric of reality itself into a tactical advantage. The ability to manipulate time would give them absolute control, allowing them to eliminate opposition before it formed, rewrite events to their benefit, and establish dominion that could never be challenged. This wasn't just dangerous technology. It was the ultimate escalation, power that corrupts absolutely because it offers absolute power. Eris watched him, her expression showing understanding of his internal conflict, but radiating urgent necessity. She didn't plead or argue. She simply observed, her gaze steady despite the approaching danger. Her patience wasn't passive. It was the calm of someone who had seen this moment play out in multiple variations, who understood the weight of the decision, but knew time was running out. She stood ready, her body angled toward escape but her attention fully on Kane's choice. She extended her hand, the gesture carrying neither request nor demand, but simple necessity. Her palm faced upward, fingers slightly curved, the position both invitation and imperative. The movement was economical, devoid of theatricality, yet it conveyed everything that needed to be said. This wasn't about trust or agreement, it was about survival, about preserving what mattered against forces that would corrupt it. In her eyes, Kane saw possibilities unfolding like branching pathways. He glimpsed futures where humanity ascended to incredible heights, mastering time and space with wisdom and compassion. He also saw darker timelines where the same knowledge became a tool of absolute control, where free will became illusion, and progress meant submission. The visions weren't detailed narratives but emotional impressions, feelings of hope and despair that washed over him in alternating waves. Her species clearly perceived potential realities as living things, probabilities that breathed and shifted with each decision. His father's last words echoed across the years, cutting through the turmoil of possible futures. Some knowledge must be earned, not taken. The phrase had lingered in his memory without full understanding, a cryptic warning from a man who knew he might not survive to explain it properly. Now the meaning became devastatingly clear. True understanding of profound truths couldn't be seized through force or stolen through opportunity. It had to be arrived at through struggle, contemplation, and moral development. Knowledge without wisdom was just another weapon. The Coalition vehicles closed the final distance, their weapon systems charging with audible energy builds. Emitter arrays glowed with building power, targeting lasers painting crimson dots across Kane's chest and the sphere behind him. The lead vehicle's armor plates shifted, revealing missile ports that tracked their position with inhuman precision. Their approach speed didn't slow. They meant to capture or eliminate with no middle ground available. Kane understood this choice wasn't really a choice at all. Preserving his life's work meant handing ultimate power to an organization that would misuse it catastrophically. Preserving possibility itself meant sacrificing everything he'd dedicated himself to, but ensuring that humanity might someday earn this knowledge rather than have it forced upon them unprepared. The decision crystallized with terrible clarity. His father's sacrifice only made sense if he chose protection over possession. Dying to prevent temporal research from falling into the wrong hands was only meaningful if his son continued that protection. Keeping the knowledge from those who would abuse it honored that sacrifice far more than preserving the physical research ever could. The old man hadn't died to protect data. He'd died to protect the future from those who would misuse that data. Their hands met and reality fractured. The desert landscape didn't dissolve so much as unravel, the solidity of sand and sky peeling back like layers of an infinite onion. The coalition vehicles continued their approach, but seemed to move through thickening syrup, their progress slowing to impossible languor. Sound distorted, stretching into elongated tones that lost all meaning. The physical world became translucent, then transparent, then something else entirely, less a place than a suggestion of place. Kane felt not skin against his palm, but something closer to concentrated energy. A vibration that resonated through his arm and into his core. The sensation carried no heat or cold, just intense presence, like holding pure potential given form. His nerves registered not texture but frequency, a hum that seemed to align with some fundamental rhythm of existence. Her grip felt both solid and insubstantial, anchoring him physically while simultaneously untying him from physical constraints. His consciousness expanded beyond the limits of his body, stretching outward in all directions at once. He became aware of himself not as a single point of perception, but as multiple observation points existing simultaneously. The feeling wasn't dizziness or disorientation so much as reorientation, his mind adjusting to operating on scales and dimensions it wasn't designed to handle. He could still feel his physical form, but it seemed distant, like a familiar object viewed through the wrong end of a telescope. He perceived timelines branching outward like glittering threads in a cosmic web. Each represented a choice made or unmade, a possibility realized or abandoned, some shown with intense clarity. Realities where he accepted the coalition's offer, where he preserved his research but lost his humanity. Others glimmered faintly, paths where he died in his father's laboratory, where the meteor never reached Earth, where Eris's people evolved differently. The visions weren't linear projections but simultaneous existences, all equally real in their potential. Eris served as his anchor within the overwhelming flood of expanded perception. Her presence functioned like a gyroscope in chaos, providing stability without limiting his awareness. She didn't guide him towards specific visions but helped him maintain coherence amid the torrent of information. Her touch created a buffer that allowed him to process the expanding reality without shattering. She understood his human limitations and protected him from perceptual overload while still allowing the revelation to unfold. He saw moments from their shared past that hadn't happened yet, or perhaps had, happened in different configurations. A conversation in a rain-soaked city where she warned him about the coalition's true motives. A struggle in a starlit observatory where they protected ancient knowledge from destruction. A quiet moment aboard a ship traveling between galaxies. Familiar ease between them suggesting years of partnership. These weren't memories from his life but echoes from other possibilities. Other versions of their connection. Her species experienced time not as a river flowing in one direction, but as an ocean where all moments existed simultaneously. Past, present, and future weren't sequential but concurrent, accessible through shifts in perception rather than movement through duration. They could navigate temporal space as humans navigate physical space, moving between moments with intention, rather than being carried by current. This explained her immediate recognition of him. In her experience, their meeting had always existed among infinite other meetings. They served as witnesses rather than interveners, recording civilizations across eternity without altering their development. Their purpose was preservation of experience, the gathering of knowledge not for use but for existence itself. They documented the rise and fall of species, the birth and death of stars, the endless variations of consciousness across the galaxy. They were archivists of reality. Their own biology evolved to serve as living repositories of cosmic history. This contact unlocked memories Kane didn't know he possessed because her touch activated dormant genetic coding passed down through his lineage. His father's research into temporal mechanics hadn't been purely theoretical. It had been rediscovery. Something in their family bloodline carried faint echoes of contact with her people generations earlier, remnants of genetic memory that normally remained inactive. Her species' touch triggered expression of these latent memories, allowing him to access knowledge that was both his and not his simultaneously. The activation explained his lifelong obsession with the Meteor. It hadn't been random fascination but genetic imperative, a deep cellular recognition calling him toward this moment. His father's work had been an attempt to understand this inheritance, to comprehend why their family felt such connection to concepts that defied conventional science. The explosion that killed him hadn't been about destroying research, but about preventing the Coalition from discovering this genetic link, this biological key to understanding temporal reality. The Coalition weapon fire began just as the temporal shift commenced, energy beams slicing through the space where they had been standing moments before. The soldiers fired at targets that were already ceasing to exist in conventional reality, their weapons discharging into emptiness. Their expressions shifted from focused aggression to confusion, then to dawning uncertainty as they scanned the suddenly vacant desert. Their instruments showed no energy signatures, no heat traces, no evidence of movement or concealment. They saw only empty sand and the abandoned research equipment, their advanced targeting systems finding nothing to lock onto. Reality folded around Kane and Eris not like a curtain closing, but like paper curling at the edges of a flame, the desert landscape bending and warping before dissolving entirely. The familiar red sand and evening sky gave way to swirling vortices of color that defied naming, hues that human eyes had never evolved to perceive. Geometric patterns emerged that followed mathematical principles unknown to earthly science, shapes that implied dimensions beyond the usual three. The transition felt less like movement and more like the universe itself, rearranging its fundamental structure around them. Kane experienced the bizarre sensation of his body simultaneously dissolving and reforming, a feeling that should have been terrifying but instead felt strangely natural under Eris's guidance. His molecules seemed to spread across multiple points of space while maintaining cohesive consciousness, his physical form both present and not present in a state of quantum ambiguity. The process contained no pain or disorientation, just a profound shift in being that his human biology accepted, because hers made it possible. He remained aware of himself as an entity, while his physical manifestation underwent radical transformation. Eris maintained constant physical contact throughout the transition, her grip serving as both anchor and conduit. Her touch provided stability not through force but through resonance, her own biological energy harmonizing with his to create a stable field amidst the dimensional shift. Her species clearly possessed innate abilities to manipulate their own molecular structure, and that of others when in contact, acting as guides through realities that would otherwise be lethal to human physiology. She didn't fight the temporal currents but moved with them, her understanding of the process complete and instinctual. They moved through dimensional space that human science couldn't perceive or measure, existing in the intervals between what conventional physics recognized as reality. The experience defied description in normal sensory terms. There was no up or down, no forward or backward, only relationships of presence and possibility. Time itself became a medium to be navigated rather than a force to be endured, a dimension with texture and current that could be read and manipulated. Eris's people clearly perceived existence as multidimensional, in ways that made human understanding seem flat and limited by comparison. The Coalition soldiers continued their fruitless search of the empty desert, their confusion growing as scans revealed no hidden compartments, no transporter signatures, no conventional means of escape. They moved through the space where Kane and Eris had stood, their boots disturbing the same sand, their instruments detecting nothing anomalous. They had witnessed disappearance without witnessing movement, evacuation without evidence of departure. Their training covered every known form of concealment and evasion. But this defied all their parameters and protocols. Kane and Eris existed between moments, outside the normal flow of time that bound the soldiers searching for them. They occupied a state of temporal suspension that wasn't stasis but rather a different relationship with duration itself. Time didn't pass for them in the same way it did for those remaining in conventional reality. They experienced it as a landscape to be traversed rather than a river to be carried along. This explained how Eris could transport them both to safety without visible movement or energy signature. Her people manipulate temporal energy as easily as humans manipulate physical space, their biological systems generating and controlling forces that humanity barely understands theoretically. They don't teleport in the conventional science fiction sense. They shift their relationship with time itself, moving through temporal dimensions rather than spatial ones. This allows them to effectively disappear from one moment and reappear in another without traversing the intervening space, making their movement undetectable to instruments that measure conventional physics. Their ability stems from evolutionary adaptation to existence across multiple timelines, their physiology developing natural capacity to navigate the deeper structure of reality. The transition completed with a soft click of reality settling into place. They stood within a structure that challenged every architectural principle Kane understood. Walls curved upward in angles that geometry couldn't justify, meeting ceilings that seemed to shift when not observed directly. The stone itself glowed with internal light, not from embedded fixtures but from the material's own luminescence, casting soft shadows that moved counter to any discernible light source. Floor patterns flowed like frozen liquid, their designs suggesting mathematical constants made physical. The air carried conflicting sensations. The sharp scent of ozone layered over the deep must of ancient dust, yet the atmosphere felt strangely alive. Currents moved without wind, carrying whispers that might have been voices or perhaps just the structure settling. Temperature fluctuated subtly across different parts of the chamber, creating pockets of warmth and coolness that followed no logical pattern. Breathing felt different here, as if the air contained more than just gases, something that registered on senses beyond the usual five. Carvings covered every surface, depicting civilizations Kane recognized from Earth's history with unnerving accuracy. He saw ancient Egyptian pharaohs overseeing pyramid construction, Roman senators debating in marble halls, medieval scholars copying manuscripts in candlelit rooms. The depictions showed not just the broad strokes of history, but specific moments. A particular battle formation used only once, a royal coronation that occurred behind closed doors, scientific discoveries made in private laboratories. The detail went beyond any historical record, capturing moments that should have been lost to time. Other carvings showed species and technologies far beyond human knowledge or imagination. Beings with multiple limbs and sensory organs arranged in non-bilateral symmetry performed rituals under alien suns. Machines that seemed to blend organic and mechanical components operated in landscapes that defied physics. Star maps depicted galactic regions humanity hadn't yet observed, with notations and scripts that used mathematical symbols unknown to human science. Some images showed civilizations rising and falling across millennia, their entire histories compressed into single narrative friezes. Eris moved through the space with the familiarity of someone returning home after long absence. Her steps followed paths invisible to Kane's eyes, her hands occasionally brushing against specific carvings as if checking their integrity. Her expression held deep reverence, the way someone might regard sacred texts or family archives. She didn't need to consult maps or guides. Her navigation seemed instinctual, bred into her through generations of her people's purpose. This was clearly a place she knew intimately despite its alien nature. She explained this was one of her people's watchtowers, observatories where they recorded history without interfering. The structures existed outside normal space-time, anchored in dimensional pockets where they could observe countless civilizations across the ages. Her species served as archivists rather than participants, documenting the rise and fall of cultures without influencing their development. Their purpose was preservation of experience itself, the gathering of knowledge for its own sake rather than for use or power. This ancient temple held the key to their shared destiny because it contained records of every major civilization across the galaxy, including the hidden history of humanity's relationship with her people. The carvings showed encounters between their species that predated recorded history, moments of contact that shaped human development without humans ever realizing it. The watchtower held not just information but context, the why behind historical events, the connections between seemingly separate civilizations, the patterns that repeated across species and millennia. Here Kane could understand not just what happened but why it mattered.